Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first off-season Monday Mailbag of 2023. I'm Eric Brandt. I'm really excited to answer all of your questions from this one. So let's get right into it. Chris S. is up first to ask, as a relatively new fan of the NBA, I'm surprised that Chauncey is still in a job. In many other sports, a coach would be fired after 2 poor seasons, if not sooner, irrespective of what other mitigating factors, especially after he's brought in specifically to fix the defense and accountability, neither of which has happened. Is this a general trend in the league, or is the team just too cheap to fire him? I don't think this is a trend. You see coaches fired relatively quickly all the time. You see coaches get a pass for longer than they should have. So yeah, I think that's just like a specific situation. But in this situation, I think there's three reasons why they are giving Chauncey at least another year. The first is, you already mentioned it, I do think there is a little bit of cheapness factor here. He still has 2 guaranteed seasons on his contract. If you fire him, you have to pay him for those 2 seasons. And then on top of that, you have to pay the new coach that you brought in. So if you're bringing in a big name coach to replace him, it's going to cost a lot of money. We saw Quinn Snyder during the season signed with Atlanta for, I believe, around $8 million a season. So you're going to pay that on top of, what you're paying Chauncey. So I definitely think cheapness is a factor here. Number two, I think that players are still bought into him. I still think that they like him. They want to fight for him. They want to be coached by him. They want to be held accountable by him still. He hasn't done a good job of implementing the accountability thing or the defense, like you mentioned. But I do think that it's not a case of like players tuning him out or anything like that. And number three, with the exit interviews and stuff, they clearly tried to deflect some of the blame from Chauncey. I do think the front office feels bad for not giving him a complete roster, not having much depth in the front court, not having a lot of size and length like he had asked for at the trade deadline. So I do think that part of the equation is that they feel like last season was, obviously Dame was hurt and they sat everyone out. And then this season they decided to tank again. So how aware was he? He was probably, told that he would not be fired after this season if he, made sure they didn't win a lot. We saw there was a game against Memphis towards the end of the season where he basically sat sharp the last 8 minutes of the game, even though we were playing Memphis in Memphis and we had come back and tied the game or taken the lead or something. And he just flat out benched Sharp. I don't think those decisions come directly from Chauncey. So I think he was kind of just doing the bidding of the front office these last two seasons. And so hopefully next year it'll change. I do expect him to be on the hot seat especially if the Blazers go all in for Damian. And then, they still have issues with defense and coaching and stuff like that. So if he does not get a lot better next year, I can't see them sticking with him much longer. But as of right now, I still think he's well respected around the league, should help this offseason with free agency and things like that. So I still think they're kind of waiting to see if Chauncey can use the last 2 years to learn from and get better as a coach. Next two questions are from Isaac Sandri. The first one is, what direction do you think the Blazers should go in your personal opinion? So, obviously I'm going to do whatever it takes to keep Dame happy. So that would be the first thing. But let's just say he was on board with whatever decision I made. I still believe in the 2 timeline system. I think the problem is it just needs to be the high-end talent guys, and then you can have some maybe into the bench guys, but you can't have like 5 of your roster spots or rotation spots with like young guys or projects or players you're hoping come out on your team different than they've been for 4 years on another team. So I think the problem with what happened was the fact that they relied on so many guys to take a jump this year that didn't take a jump. And I just don't think you can do that. So I think they need to do a better job of mixing in veterans and role players that know their job and can accomplish that, are proven at accomplishing that. So obviously, whatever pick we get, if we get Victor Wembanyama, this all doesn't matter because we're gonna draft him, and he's gonna be awesome and just plug right in, and it's pretty much a cure to everything that this team needs. But short of that, I'm probably shopping the pick, going after like a big name star, just seeing what's available. If none of those are really available or the price isn't right, then I'd have no problem keeping the pick if this was up to me, adding another young, really good player, top 7 pick or whatever it ends up being, alongside Shaedon Sharpe. So you have those two still. You still have Anthony, who's relatively young. And then, so I just add to that. And there's 2 guys in particular, Brandon Miller and Jarris Walker, that I think could help relatively quickly rather than, being years away from contributing. Some of the other players, whether it's the Thompson twins or Scoot Henderson, they play positions or, I don't know how they necessarily fit on this team, so I have no problem shopping those picks as well. You try to get a Mikal Bridges, who's looking like he's untouchable now, but I don't know if any of that would shake out that way. So I would definitely try that route, but I still have no problem doing it. So then I would shift to basically just collecting all the other players that haven't really taken that next step, like I said. So you put like a Nas, Keon, Knox, if you want to pick up his option and use that contract in a trade. And you just like combine those guys and try to get a veteran, whether it's like the Nets, like I mentioned, have several other wings besides Mikal Bridges. So like a Dorian Finney-Smith or a Royce O'Neal or something like that. Just try to add some veterans that way. And then in free agency, you use the MLE and minimum contracts to find as many vets that can plug holes and that can fill a role and be decent. And you just give this team some depth, some shooters, some defense, some guys who have been around, some tough guys. Like you just have to find a good mix of veterans around then Sharpe and whatever that draft pick is. So I'm not necessarily like for sure you have to do this. So I definitely keep it open and try different things. But I would ultimately have no problem drafting another player in the top 10 and adding another talented prospect to this roster, as long as I was able to make moves and other ways to keep Dame happy. All right, Isaac's second question is also, do you think Sharpe will be a good starter next season? Actually think starting Sharpe might be somewhat, I wouldn't say detrimental, but actually think he would get more opportunities to be the type of player he is at leading the bench and being the main scorer off the bench. Because if he's with the starters, especially depending on how many moves there are, but let's just say we bring back Jeremy and Dame and stuff, he's at best the second option or third option, whereas off the bench, he could be the number 1 option and have the ball in his hands. We saw him, pretty much excel in that role towards the end of this season. So I almost think it would be better for him to master that role as the 6th man first, and then you can bump him up to starter. If he's just so good in that role, it's obvious he needs to be bumped up. But I don't think you have to force anything. You still have 3 years left on his rookie deal. He's still going to be like 20 years old. So, I just don't think you have to make him be a starter next year. And on top of that, last offseason he got hurt in his first summer league game after a few minutes. And he was out like most of the summer then, so he couldn't work on his game that much, get better. So I also want to see, and this goes for any young player, not just Sharpe, but instead of just like making moves to like make sure he's the starter, I kind of want to see how he reacts to the success he had at the end of the season. Does that motivate him to get better? Does he like? Because some players, I'm not saying this is Sharp, because everything I've heard about his work ethic, it's good, and he works really hard. But a lot of young players have that success, and they think they've made it, and they arrive, and they don't work as hard or improve at all, and that's the best they ever get. Or their sophomore season is a rough year because they realize that they need to work hard and keep improving, stuff like that. So hopefully that's a lesson that Sharp doesn't need to learn, but I would be cautious to just promise him or make moves that make it so we are relying on Sharp to be that starter and be really good on a team that's trying to contend. If that's what we do for Dame, is go all in and try to make this a contending roster. I think putting him at the 2 and putting that pressure on him to be good in his second season, I think that might be the wrong approach, just with young players. And like I said, with the question about what I would do in my personal preference is, like, I want young talent. I want, players that you drafted high and things like that. But I don't want to put them in positions where they have to be good, or we're gonna be in trouble as a team. So I would love for Sharp to first master that off the bench role as a 6-man, maybe win 6-man of the year next year, and just be a completely dominant force against second units. And then, you can plug him in with the starters. He still gets to play, 30 plus minutes a night. It's not like you're limiting how many minutes he can play or anything like that. So I'd like to see that steps. But, I mean, at the same time, Sharp looked amazing as a starter. So, I mean, I wouldn't put it past him to just get plugged into that starting spot and just take off with it and be like a really good player from from the jump next year, and the Blazers never look back. But so I could definitely see that too. He's just that good. But I wouldn't put that on him immediately. I would make it so that has to play out, whether it's through practices or later on next season. All right, next question is from Murray, who asked, how much faith do you have in the future of our franchise looking past Dame's tenure? Do you think we'll be successful in the case Jody is still our owner during Sharp and Ant's runs? Well, we don't even know if Sharp and Ant are going to be on the team after this summer. But, yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that they both are. But, yeah, anyways, this is tough for me because I do believe if the future is Sharp and Ant and they're still on the team, that could be a really good future, especially if they added another top 10 pick to this in this offseason, which it doesn't look like they're going to. Obviously, if they get Wembanyama, our future looks brighter than any teams in the league with those three. But the whole Dame situation has made me just like completely sour on this situation, because if you go all in for Dame and you trade some of those guys to win now, like, I don't know, like it's going to be tough to like make this team a contender around Dame, like right away this year, and sacrifice some of that future, or we're trading Dame and eventually, and then like what's to say when it's Sharp's time to be a free agent? Like why? Like what's to say he's going to stay here? So like we could lose Sharp in a few years, like it just, I don't know. It's just like if we can't keep Dame happy, it just makes me feel like no matter how bright the future looks, like will anyone stay in Portland anymore? Like we had a guy who is completely loyal to Portland that's now questioning his loyalty because of how bad this front office has been through his tenure. So it just makes me wonder, can we even keep these guys if we move on from Dame? So I hate to be gloomy and bleak like that, but it does. I don't know if I have any faith in our franchise outside of those guys are really good and can maybe overcome our front office deficiencies if they keep developing and turn into stars. So yeah, I mean, lottery's still to come. Hopefully, we get lucky and get Wemby, and then none of this matters. Next up, we have Daniel Schoenberg, who asks, when can we expect your offseason preview video with salary breakdown? More specifically, how does Jeremy Grant's expected 5-year, $150 million contract impact our salary cap? The video will be out sometime, I don't remember the exact date, but it's right after the draft lottery, I think. And that's because once we know our picks, then we can slot those picks into the salary breakdown, so we know, like, if we keep the picks, how much they count against the cap and all that kind of stuff. So that'll be shortly after the draft lottery, sometime in that week after May 16th. Specifically when it comes to Jeremy Grant, let's just say he did sign that 5-year, $150 million, and it was $30 million a season. We're obviously going to be over the cap. We have a little bit of wiggle room from the cap line to the luxury tax line. So if Jody's going to make us stay under the tax, it's going to be very difficult. But I think with some of the moves they made at the deadline, they could just let those guys walk, maybe resign one of them, like a Matisse Thybulle, for cheap, and then, just make solid other moves that don't cost a lot, and maybe duck the tax again. I'd hate it if that's the plan. Obviously, that's like the worst case if you're trying to make Dame happy, probably. But I could definitely see it with Jody running the ship. So, yeah, it's basically we might be able to have a little bit of cap space if we don't re-sign Jeremy Grant, about $20 million, but then we lose all our exceptions and MLE and things like that, trade exception. And now that in the new CBA, the mid-level exception can be used as a trade chip, it looks like. So we lose a lot of ways to improve the roster by just getting about $20 million in cap space if we let all the free agents walk and don't have draft picks and stuff. So I don't think it's really worth letting him walk. So they're kind of stuck in a situation where they have to pay him, and it's going to put them over the cap. But they do have the rights to re-sign almost all their free agents to whatever price tag it costs, as long as Jody's willing to pay. But yeah, will be determined by how much Jody allows, because if she allows them to go all in financially, it probably won't matter too much in terms of his contract. But if they're trying to duck the tax, it's going to be tough. And I don't really know how they can improve that much of the roster. All right, my guy Zach is next up. With the new midseason tournament, we are now going to be seeing certain teams in the season with more than 82 games played. Do you think that it's now time to reevaluate the play-in tournament and make those games an extension of the regular season as well? It just doesn't make sense to me to have the stats for those games go into a no man's land where they aren't a part of the playoffs or regular season anymore. Yeah, well, the in-season tournament sounds like it's going to count towards regular season games. So I think that, obviously those stats will all not fall into that void you're talking about. But I think the play-in tournaments, if you're going to have them, they've been great. 3 out of the 4 play-in, at least the first parts of the play-in games were awesome this year. So, I'd like the stats to be just playoffs. I think they should just go in the playoff stats. Maybe the championship game, if that's the extra 83rd game that a team plays, could maybe count as that as well. Just like playoffs, or I don't think there needs to be a whole new category. Actually, I wouldn't care if it was like considered regular season or playoffs. Might affect how many some kind of records in terms of points in a season or whatever, but I don't think anyone cares about that kind of stuff. So yeah, I would just make them all part of the playoffs, but it doesn't sound like that's going to happen. So I don't know. And then Zach has a follow-up very weird question. How do you let her know you cherish her? Zach, man, come on. You just tell her. Tell her. I cherish you. That's all you have to tell her. There you go. Communication is the key, my man. Just communicate it. If you cherish her, let her know you cherish her. You got this. This question implies that I am wrong about Cronin. I don't think I am. But anyways, I'm just messing. But anyways, I'm still I'm gonna give Cronin credit if he succeeds this offseason. It's still possible. He could get saved by Wemby. He could get saved by another player leveraging his way here, like Jeremy Grant did. So yeah, there's still definitely ways he can prove me wrong and show that he's capable and competent as a GM. I don't have any faith in that happening, but I will definitely admit I'm wrong if he puts a contending roster that's deep and has doesn't have holes that Tori and I here on Blazers Uprise say that they have holes at certain areas and should address them with these people. And these people either get signed for less money or traded for less than we could have offered and go on to have success on their new teams, while Cronin's sitting here not addressing a single issue with this team, like center depth and things like that everyone knew was going to be a problem heading into last season. So if he does a much better job of balancing the roster and adding depth and shooting and defense and things like that, I'll have no problem saying he did a good job. I've admitted on the trades where he has done well, like the Grant trade was a good trade. And I also defended him in the Warriors situation. The minute that news came out, we were on a Blazers Uprise Live a few minutes later, and I flat out said I do not believe that Cronin would mislead or lie to another GM. It just doesn't seem like him. So, I'm it's not like I'm incapable of like saying he did a good job or giving him credit. I just don't think he has deserved much credit for anything he's done so far. And he even admitted during his exit interviews that he's made mistakes and hasn't been as good as he has hoped so far. So hopefully that's all going to change this summer, and hopefully his decisions will not end up costing this franchise Damian Lillard. And if it does, I will never forgive him. But as long as he can mend that bridge that Dame seems to be wavering on, and makes him happy and brings in finally gets some talent around Dame that he could feel like he can win with, I have no problem giving him credit for that. All right, Braden Tennis has 2 questions up next. The first one is, do you feel this will be a better offseason than last year's? Oh, man. Well, getting Jeremy Grant and Shaedon Sharpe in an offseason, I mean, that's pretty good. So if they can do better than that this offseason, you got to feel pretty excited, right? So the problem is they have to be better this offseason. It has to be better. So hopefully, like I said, with the last question, Cronin learned from some of his mistakes from last season and does a much better job of actually getting depth at certain positions and getting role players in the positions that this team needs. I don't feel better that it's going to be better than last offseason, if that makes sense. But I do feel like they're kind of pushed into a corner where they basically have to have a really good offseason, or we're talking about having to possibly deal with a situation where Damian Lillard wants out and is sick of not getting him any help. So it's got to be, man. And then his next question is, how many Blazers do you think will be returning this season? Ooh, that's an interesting question. This is a tough question because if they pull off a big trade, obviously they'd have to get rid of a bunch of guys just to make the money work. So it's hard to know, but if I just had to guess, I think Sharpe's back. I think Jeremy resigns. I think one of Anthony and Nurkic is back. So that's 4. Obviously, Dame's back. And then I think like one of Jabari Walker or Trendon Watford will be back. So that's 6. I think they re-sign one of Thibault and Reddish, probably Thibault, so that's 7. I think they probably re-sign Skylar Mays. That's 8. And then I could maybe see one or two others. The two-way guys I could see being back on two-ways next year. Skylar or Nate Williams I could see being two-way instead of on the main roster as well. But I think everyone else outside of maybe Winslow, which would make 9. So I'm going to say 8 or 9 back. And I think Nas, Keon, Kevin Knox, and one of Anford and Nurk will go out in trades. Just a guess. I have no idea. The great Sam Dooley is up next. He asks, what are you hopeful for in our owner cap situation? Man, hopeful? I'm hopeful that the team gets sold and we get an owner that cares and doesn't mind committing financially to winning, because that's, I believe, most teams, unless you're super young and still have a lot of players on rookie deals. If you have a lot of veteran talent, you have to commit to paying for that talent to stay. You don't let a guy like Josh Hart walk when you can re-sign him. So I know this is going to sound gloomy once again, but I'm not very hopeful at all in our cap situation. Felt like it was a huge misstep at the trade deadline to not bring back any salary really for next year, because they're kind of stuck in this situation where they have to trade like a starter or a core piece to get someone back in a trade that has a significant contract. Whereas if you would have brought in just anyone that had an expiring salary next year, you can use those as they don't really have a lot of value in trades, but you can use it to match salary along with like your lottery pick or whatever. And all of a sudden you're not talking about trades that include like Anford in the lottery pick for someone. You're saying like James Wiseman in the lottery pick for this person, and you can still get probably just as good of a player because that pick could be very valuable, but you're not having to attach one of your core pieces to that either. So I just feel like they're stuck in a position where they're going to have to trade at least one, if not multiple core pieces, just because of the situation they put themselves in. And it's just frustrating to me. So I'm not very hopeful at all, but hopefully they pull a rabbit out of their hat and make something happen with very little ways to make it happen. So I guess I'm hopeful that something will happen, but I'm not very hopeful that it'll be good. Next up, we have Smokey, who asks, can Mikal Bridges do what Jeremy Grant did to get here? I don't think he can. Well, one, I don't see him just flat out wanting to leave the Nets. I mean, it's been a good situation for him. He's had, a career, not half a season, but a career chunk of the season, just being the man on his own team. He's proven that he could be a star in this league. He had a really good first playoff game as well. So I don't think he can leverage it himself here or want to. And the other thing is he's still on a really good contract for 3 more years at just over $20 million a season. So unlike Jeremy, who was in his last year of his deal, could leave for nothing after that season. Also, when he signed in free agency, had a handshake agreement with the Piston front office that if he did want to leave as a thank you for signing with them, they would try to accommodate him best they could. And obviously, Mikal wouldn't have that with the Nets since he was just traded there, not choosing to go there. So, he could definitely go to the front office and say that he wants out and wants to go to the Blazers, but short of Dame somehow convincing him to do that, I just don't see why he would. And even if he did, I don't see why the Nets would want to A, trade him, and B, They don't really need to rebuild because a lot of their own future picks and pick swaps and things like that are owed to the Houston Rockets, and a lot of their first round picks they have now are from teams like the Suns, who have. So it doesn't matter how they do. So that it doesn't do them any good to just tear it down. So the only really situation I could see is if they just really loved someone in the draft and we happen to be number 2 and that's Scoot Henderson or something like that. So maybe you can make something work for Mikal that way. But other than that, I have a tough time seeing it work, especially since the Blazers don't have a trade exception like they did last summer that could absorb Mikal Bridges without having to match salary either. So who knows how many players from the Blazers they'd want on their roster and all that. So yeah, I just think it's a completely different situation. Next up, we have Devin Ford, who asked several questions here, so I'll just get to them one at a time. What are your thoughts on Dame not wanting to be a part of a young rebuild? It's not so much that it's bothersome that he doesn't want to be a part of a rebuild. It's just that I just don't like him cutting off that route if he happens to notice, like with Sharp last year, he immediately saw the potential in Sharp and was okay with them drafting Sharp and keeping a younger player on the roster. I think they kind of failed him with all the other moves and stuff. So I think that I'm okay with him wanting to win. Obviously, I want to win too, so I want him to want to win here. I just don't like closing off the draft as like completely not able to help. And the next question is Wemby the exception? You think? Yeah, absolutely. Wemby is the exception. He's going to be, by all accounts, a generational player. He could really help a lot of the deficiencies of this team. So yeah, I absolutely think he's an exception. If I was the front office and Dame said you need to trade the pick or he requests out, what would you do? He'd never do that, but a fun hypothetical to think about. I hate going into anything saying you have to do this or you have to do that. Like I was talking about with one of the questions earlier, it's just when you have the ability to make a big move if it's there, but you can't force it to happen or you can't make a trade appear. So I don't like going into it saying you have to trade the pick or else. But obviously for Dame, he's still in my mind gets that lifetime pass for being the person he is and the player he is. So if he says we need to trade the pick or he's out, we got to trade the pick, I guess. So hopefully it doesn't come to that specifically, but yeah, I would do whatever it takes to make sure he's happy. Kyle Wilson is up next. What do the Blazers do if their pick falls outside the top 5? Because that pick isn't going to be valuable enough to get back a player capable of single-handedly turning us into a contender again, the way an Embiid for Ant plus a top 3 pick plus as many picks as possible trade might do. I mean, obviously, the higher the pick is, 2, 3, it has more value than 6 or 7. So, yeah, you're not wrong there. I just think, Embiid's probably a pipe dream. He'd have to specifically ask out and all that kind of stuff. I doubt that happens. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think it'll be extremely devastating. It's just the fact that Portland has this opportunity to get a situation where Wembanyama could change the entire outlook of the franchise single-handedly. Like that, it would suck not getting that, obviously. But I don't necessarily think it's the end of the world if they get 6 or 7 or 8. It would still be a decent trade chip. I just think you'd have your sights set on some lower players. Then I think I still think you can get an OG trade done, for example, with the 6th or 7th pick. So yeah, I don't think it's out of the realm. I don't think there's a lot of teams that are going to be trading picks up that high anyway. So if you're one of the only teams willing to trade in those scenarios that could become valuable as well. But yeah, I mean, obviously tanking the end of the season and then not getting a top 5 pick when you have the 5th best odds. It's still mathematically 7th is the pick most likely for them to get still. But at the same time, we're all bummed when we fell to 7th last year, but I think almost all of us would rather have Shaden Sharp than pretty much anyone else in the draft outside of Paulo Banchero maybe. So I think you just have to make the most of it if that's what happens. It's not the best scenario to try and to build a contender, but you still have that pick and you can still make something happen in my mind. Next up, we have Blue Wolf, who asked, when the Trailblazers' long streak of playoff appearances came to an end, the same was true for Utah. Boston was in a similar rebuilding situation. Over the last decade, how does the Trailblazers rebuild compared to what Utah and Boston accomplished? So I clarified this with Blue Wolf. He meant from basically the time Portland didn't make the playoffs last, which is around 2003. So we're going back 20 years, which is kind of weird to do rebuilds over 20 years because there's several rebuilds by all of these teams in that time. But yeah, 2003, Portland made the playoffs. That would be their last playoff appearance. That I believe that's the year they almost came back from a 3-0 deficit. Would have been the first team in the NBA to ever do that. But lost in Game 7 to the Dallas Mavericks. And then, that was the Jailblazer era. So we had several years after that of this franchise becoming a mess and that whole situation. And then leads into the 2006 drafting of Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge. And then the next year, Blazers win the lottery, get Greg Oden. So I think they did a really good job of bouncing back. Roy, for how short of a career he had due to injury, he was the right person for this team at that time to kind of get us out of a funk and bring joy back to Blazer basketball. And that team, I mean, you can't really rebuild better than that. Just unfortunate that 2 out of the 3 ended up with career-ending injuries at a young age and were never really the same. So it's unfortunate, but I thought the Blazers did a good job of rebuilding there. And then they tried to make it work for several years. Didn't really until 2012 when they drafted Damian Lillard. Didn't make the playoffs the first year, and then they had that whole team. And then, unfortunately, LaMarcus leaves in 2015. They end up, basically trading everyone from the starting lineup outside of Dame. But then CJ comes in, and they make a few good moves, and are right back in the playoffs still, and make the playoffs for, I believe, 8 or 9 straight years. And then, obviously, the last 2 years have been rough. So yeah, I think these last few years, in particular, they've just failed to give Dame the kind of help he needs to make it a true contending team. And that's been unfortunate, but I think, twice you saw the route of the Blazers, whether it was the Dame and Robin Lopez, Wes Matthews, Nick Batum, and Aldridge teams, or the Roy, Oden, Aldridge teams. They were headed in the right direction, and it just didn't work out for various reasons, mostly injuries. But would have liked to seen how either of those situations panned out without the injuries. But unfortunately, you can't fix that. But ever since the last few years have just been, I don't think they've done a good job of putting the right pieces in this organization to become a contender. As for Utah, that was 2003 would have been the last year with Karl Malone before he left for the Los Angeles Lakers for a season before retiring. So that was their last trip to the playoffs for a few years. Um, they didn't really do the greatest job of rebuilding, in my mind, but they did draft Darren Williams and added him, and then they made some other good moves. They had Carlos Boozer for a while, Andre Kirilenko. Um, yeah, so they had a pretty good team they were building up. And then um, they ended up trading Darren Williams and went through a bunch of years of downtime again. And then they made some good moves along the way, drafting Rudy Gobert or trading for him in that draft was a good move. And then the big move was in the 2017 draft when they traded up to get Donovan Mitchell. And that was a good move, but that team never made it out of the second round. And they've never really been contender either. So it's weird because the Blazers, I don't know, I feel like in that time frame they had two teams that were better than any of those Utah teams in that same time frame, but obviously Utah didn't have the injury stuff that the Blazers had. So I feel like Utah didn't do the greatest job. But then this past year, Danny Ainge comes in, trades Gobert and Mitchell for a ton of different assets. They have a guy like Lauri Markkanen pop, and now their future looks really bright, but still too early to see how that rebuild goes. But I don't think they've done the greatest job with what they've had in that same time frame that you're asking about. And then for the Boston Celtics, I mean, it's hard to compare really many teams to the Celtics. So 20 years ago, they had Paul Pierce. They were in the playoffs several times, including one Eastern Conference Finals appearance. But the team just wasn't getting it done. And then all of a sudden in 2007, they are super disappointed when they don't win the lottery or get second to get either Odin or Durant. And they end up with the fifth pick. And then they just change on the fly, use that fifth pick to acquire Ray Allen. And then they also trade Al Jefferson, some other pieces for Kevin Garnett and form that trio. So that's gives you maybe some hope for the Blazers this summer. They're going to have a pick around 5. And, maybe they could pull off a miracle like getting two really good players like that and transforming their team because they end up winning the championship that year. And so that was obviously great moves to build talent around their already established star in Paul Pierce. And then they went, obviously they made the trade a few years later. They ended up winning one championship, lost in the championship another time. But they end up moving on from Garnett and Pierce in that great trade with the Nets that stockpiles them with a ton of picks. And then the Nets don't end up doing anything with those guys, so they end up being bad. And those picks end up being really high, allowing them to get players like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. And so they parlay that into another run of success where they make the conference finals several times. They trade for Kyrie along the way, and they make a lot of good moves. And then last season they made it all the way to the finals before losing to the Warriors. So yeah, that I don't think it's any comparison between the three. Boston's clearly the best at rebuilding. I believe I saw a stat that 50% of the conference finals since the NBA has been a league have included the Boston Celtics. So that means on average every other season they are in the conference finals. Now a lot of that goes back to Bill Russell days where they were in the finals every year, but that's incredible. So they never really have long periods of droughts. Maybe with winning championships, but not for like building good quality teams. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see long term, especially if they move on from Jaylen Brown this summer. if they can still be up there with the pieces they get from that trade. But overall, I think that Boston's just in its own realm in terms of rebuilds. They always seem to find a way to get the talent needed to get back to being a contender. And Utah and Portland obviously have not found a way to do that. All right, last two questions are both from Aeromancer. His first one is, what do you think about Jeremy Grant's fashion aesthetics? I don't mind Jeremy Grant's fashion at all. I think it's kind of cool, but I couldn't pull off any of his outfits either. So yeah, it's not for me. Like, I would never be able to wear any of those clothes, but yeah, I mean, for him, he seems to make it work. Seems like a fashionable guy. So I don't think he's quite as out there as some of the other players like Kyle Kuzma or Russell Westbrook type, but yeah, I think he's got a good fashion sense, and it's always interesting to see what he's wearing when they show the pregame fits of them walking into the locker room. But yeah, no problem with it. But yeah, I'm not really a fashionable guy, so it doesn't really, not really my world or my expertise. And Neuromancer's final question is, who are some early in the year second round sleepers Mike Schmitz might be eyeing at pick 43? I don't think we have enough history with Schmitz yet to know what kind of players he likes. I mean, obviously you can look at his drafting, but all his previous draftings, he seemed to like tons of different people. It's not like he has one pick and can only pick one guy, and you have to make him choose like he is in a position now. So, assuming we keep the 43rd pick, I would expect them to, at some point, address the international prospecting that they've been talking about now since Cronin took over. They've added several scouts and people in charge of international scouting. So I'd be surprised if they kept their draft picks and didn't take someone that they could either stash overseas or that is from overseas that is ready to play. I don't know who that is, whether that's James Nagy or Nikola Jurisic or Tristan Vukcevic. One of those type of guys. I wouldn't be surprised if they took one of them. But yeah, I have no idea who. As for me, if he's there on the board, I love Deron Holmes from Dayton. I think he's going to be one of those next guys who's taken in the second round and who teams wonder, like Gafford or a Nicholas Claxton type, that it's like they're really good rim running centers and can do a lot of things and can help teams win. And people wonder why they fell to the second round. So that's someone I would look at. But there's also a ton of like older guys now because of COVID. There's players that had extra eligibility and stuff. So there's a lot of older players that will probably fall to the second round because they're older, but could definitely help teams relatively quickly, whether that's Keontae Johnson, Jaime Jaquez, Marcus Sasser, if he falls that far. Those type of players, I think, can help teams. So I wouldn't be surprised if they took someone like that too. But yeah, who knows? They could go the complete opposite and take, just a flyer on a young guy that they're planning on, keeping on a two-way or something. But yeah, with how they, specifically Dame has mentioned not wanting a lot of projects and young guys, and Cronin also mentioned that they had to get away from projects and needed winning players. I would be surprised if it wasn't someone that was ready to play or contribute or an overseas stash. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Monday Mailbag. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to all who contributed with questions this time. If you would like to leave a question, just look out for that prompt on the community tab on Blazers Uprise, and we hope to feature your questions on the next one. And until then, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.